Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Auto Bravado channel. Today, I'm here with this 1997 Ford Expedition. Let's get into the review. This was Ford in the late 90s. A big four-door, three-row family luxury SUV is exactly what you wanted amongst all the other station wagons you could buy. The Expedition was launched all the way back for the 1997 model year, and it's in the highest-end Eddie Bauer edition. This means that you get leather upholstery, radio, dual-zone climate control, all-wheel drive system, and so on. The amenities keep coming and coming. I just have to demonstrate this vehicle's importance on the SUV craze that we're living in now. All the way back in the 1990s, you would only see station wagons, sedans, and maybe the occasional Chevrolet Suburban. So this really was an outlier for General Motors and Ford in the late 90s. First generation Expedition, it was the grounds to build on the ultimate luxury SUV. And I have to say, they did such a good job with the very first one. The Expedition was really the grounds for what the luxury family SUV would become. Mercedes came out with their ML class, Ford with the Expedition, Chevy with the Suburban, and so on. This really helps you point out why the Expedition was the start of it all. So I just want to move around to the back of the Expedition, and once again, this is the Eddie Bauer edition, which is the top of the line trim. It comes with this really cool color matched pinstripe that goes all the way from the front to the back of the car. Really cool to see this. We saw the same thing on the Escape we did in the past few months, so really cool to see that this trend continues on all of their models. Once more, I have to talk about the suspension of this vehicle. This is the Eddie Bauer edition for off-roading, and it comes with 4-link up front and airbag suspension in the rear, and it raises and lowers depending on the drive you're in. 2-wheel, 4-wheel, 4-wheel low. So really cool to see this. I want you to take a minute to realize just how much of a niche this car really is. Go back 23 years when this car was brand new, and then look at the cars from today. You will see nothing like this. A big V8 powered rear drive family luxury SUV that weighs about 4,800 pounds. This is really something to marvel at. All right, so before we get inside, I just want to talk about the key again. And yes, we normally do this on most of the cars, but I have to point out this is a really intricate detail. So the Escape we did had the same design key. However, on the Expedition, the lock, unlock, and panic buttons are quite different. It's really interesting because they could have used the same design, but they didn't. All right, so now we're going to get inside. We'll unlock the doors, unlocked, and we can get in. And yes, now that I'm sitting in this interior, it stands true to the idea that this is a huge family luxury SUV. The door panels are huge, window switches are huge, there's leather about everywhere. You have your driver functions on the steering wheel. I mean, it is a relatively basic dash design layout and so on, but other than that, it's really good. Something I really want to point out, I think it's really interesting, these door panel to dashboard gaps. It's really interesting just the way Ford designed and engineered and put this car together. I mean, it's really a huge bubbly dash they have going on, and everything's really interesting. I'll go ahead and say that. Down here, I just have to show you, there's a cubby hole where you can put stuff in with a little bit of a grade so they don't fall out. Really cool to see that they put this in here because not many people think to have this anymore. So let's just go back to the idea of this bubbly dash. Swooping lines, wavy curves. If we look down here below the radio cluster, you can see they've sort of integrated all of the cup holders, cigarette lighter adapters into this bubble. It's really cool because they've had to curve these plastics in and so forth, and you can obviously pull out the ashtray. Everything here is good to go in and out, and it looks flush. Alright, so I want to move up to the top here where there's all these functions for air conditioning, obviously, but there's these 2 buttons that say vent on them. You push them back and the rear vent opens, and we'll close it again. Really cool. You can open the rear vents to allow air in. If you don't want to open these windows, you have those ones in the rear. Really smart thinking on Ford's part. We'll go ahead and open the one on the right. The amount of storage space really continues even on the ceiling of the Expedition. You have a place for your sunglasses as well as another place to store other items. Back in the 90s, you listened to stuff off of cassette tape and CD players. That's no exception in here. You have 2 6-disc CD changers for a total of 12. Alright, so we're going to get in the rear seats of the Expedition, and there's really such a huge amount of room back here. You can really sprawl out, relax, and just hang out. And I'll refresh you on the idea that this is a family SUV, and that continues on to the rear seats back here. You have a place right up here where you can adjust your volume and radio stations when you plug in your audio adapter to your headphones. Really cool to see that they put this in here. Every Expedition. Yes, this has dual zone or tri-zone climate control, which is really nice because you have these ceiling mounted vents that you can adjust for all 3 passengers, meaning they have their own climate control vent. Really cool. I mean, Ford really tried to make the Expedition something other than all of their other models in their lineup. The Expedition really was Ford's entrance into the luxury SUV or car market. They really spiced up this interior. Yes, this is a 3-row family SUV, and it's quite apparent when we pull this tab, fold the middle row down, folds all the way down, we can hop into the rear seats of the Expedition. And now that we have the rear seats folded up, you are lacking a bit of legroom and headroom because the rear bench is actually raised on the floor above the front 2 rows, which is really interesting because they've added so much rear middle row legroom, but they've really lost a lot back here. I will say this is probably one of the more comfortable 3-row SUVs because you have a huge arm panel with a giant glass window here. Really cool to see this. That opens, so you technically have all of the windows having the ability to open. So we want to get out of the rear row, so I'm just going to push this down, and as you can see here, it's folded, but there's still a space here where there's carpet and part of the seat here. So what we can do is we can pull this little tab and pull it back. That way the load floor is flush with the rest of the car. Really cool that they've done this, partly for 2 reasons. It looks nice and it acts as a level long loading floor for bigger objects, because that's what you're going to be doing in this car. You're going to be towing and storing a lot of things back here. So before we move on to under the hood, I just have to point out these kick panels have lights on opposite ends which illuminate both sides of the kick panel. That way, when you open the door, they both light up. This is really cool. Adds that little nice touch of luxury to your drive. Alright, so this 5.4 liter V8 only makes about 235 horsepower, which seems underpowered for a V8, and especially in a car like this. But I have to tell you, this motor is not about power, top-end power, racing, anything like that. It's all about torque, because you're going to be towing with this. It develops 330 pound-feet of torque, which is a lot for any car today. And this 5.4 liter V8 is especially special, I would say, because the Triton 5.4 liter V8s have always had problems where they've had to be rebuilt at about 100,000 miles. This one is no exception. It was just rebuilt and it has about 20,000 miles on this specific motor. Well, we've taken an in-depth look at this 1997 Ford Expedition. Now it's time to take it out on the road for a drive. Alright, so we're going to take the Expedition on a drive. Here we go. We're going to hop in right now. Going to start it up. Here we go. Here we go. Starts right up. Seatbelt on. We're going to put it into drive. Here we go. So we're pulling out into traffic now, and the power steering is actually really light, and they do this because this is a heavy car. It's about 4,800 pounds, and they want you to be able to move this car relatively freely, and that's really apparent. I mean, you can truly get this car going around. Alright, so we're just cruising along, and another thing I have to point out, this motor redlines at about 5,000 RPM, so it is not exactly a high revving V8 gasoline motor. I mean, it's really approaching diesel territory, if I could say that, but there's a really good amount of mid-range power, and it's quite apparent when you start to put your foot in it, but nonetheless, it's actually a decent powertrain. So we're coming up to light and we're braking. You actually have to put your foot in it a decent amount. These are not necessarily over boosted power brakes, but they do that because you're not really supposed to be, driving this thing around, braking hard, getting on the gas. I mean, this is the luxury SUV. You could just sit back and relax in, and you can do just that. So even giving a little bit of throttle, you can start to feel all that torque. I mean, I'm at about 1800 RPM right now, and you can really start to feel what this motor is capable of. There's not much mid-range power, but I'll say you definitely feel like you can go a lot faster than you think. Man, this thing sings. It has actually a decent amount of mid-range power. That's actually really surprising, and you can definitely feel the torque. This is only a 4-speed auto with a 5th gear for overdrive, obviously, but I mean that's a good amount of grunt right there in any car. I mean, you really have to put your foot down a little bit, because it's like, hey, you want to do this, you got to put your foot down. I mean, the way the throttle is set up, if you want to get going, you put your foot down. Now the brakes are not really braking anymore because there's no rotor or pad to brake with. The owner needs to put new brakes and everything on it, so braking is probably a bit skewed to what it would actually be like, but nonetheless it still stops relatively well. Alright, so we're gonna fully get into it here. I'm gonna roll into it. It keeps going. It keeps accelerating. That's actually really gnarly. Wow. I mean, you have to really stand in the brakes if you want to stop, and that's definitely apparent. I can actually feel a little bit of chattering in the brake pedal right now, but it moves. It really does. You can keep accelerating and accelerating, and it really feels like that. A 90s Ford, but let's take a look back in history with the Ford Flathead V8. The Ford Flathead V8 was Ford's first entrance into something that was relatively powerful compared to the competition. The V8 torque, the low-end power, you could really understand why people like V8 so much, which is why they put them in the Expedition, the Explorer, and so on. Really sit back and relax, put on your tunes. You have dual zone climate control, you have cruise control, you have power everything. You can really sit back and relax, and nowadays you can pick these up for next to nothing, and they're still relatively reliable. And if you get one that has a rebuilt motor, you've just scored. And again, I want to elaborate on the rebuilt engine. They fixed some of the previous problems with the first generation 5.4 liter, so you won't be having that problem anymore. We won't be using the off-road systems here, the all-wheel drive, the 4-wheel high, and the 4-wheel low, but you don't really need it. You have a lot of low-end torque, so it's actually really surprising. To take a road trip on, and you don't want to be all huddled up and crowded in one little car, this is the car to do that. It's not the most fuel efficient, it's not the most easy to drive around, but you can really sit back and enjoy yourself while driving this thing. I will say, even with the overboosted power steering and the, well, pushy brake pedal, it still gives you a little bit of feedback, which is really nice, because if you're going to be off-roading this thing, you want to know what your tires and your brakes are doing. Alright, so we're going to do a U-turn here, and I just have to demonstrate how well this thing turns. It's overboosted and whatnot, but it goes really well. And this is a long car, so it's really surprising you're able to do that. I mean, this is the first generation of the Expedition. I mean, Ford really went all out on this, and they tried to make this something that was much, much better than the Explorer, the Escape, the Focus, all those other cars. And they really succeeded because it's so different from everything else that they sold, and it was far better than what the competition had at the time. I strongly, strongly believe that this car over time might even gain some value back because of what it is. Compared to everything else, there's nothing like this around anymore. Yes, it's a gas guzzling V8. You have overboosted power steering, all these little things you just don't see anymore. Everything is dodged away and shying from that all good driving experience. Well, it's something to really think about. It's a car you just don't see anymore. The design, the style, and it's really sad to see these cars going away. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you had a blast watching it as much as I had making it. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys all here soon in the next video. See ya.